welcome to another edition of the China Forum. My name is Kerry Dumbaugh. In November of 2009, President Barack Obama made his first visit to the People's Republic of China, so we're going to be talking about that today. With us in the studio to help us parse this very important event are two gentlemen well known in the China business. First, Ambassador James Sasser, former U.S. ambassador to the People's Republic of China, and from 1977 to 1995, a U.S. senator from the state of Tennessee. That's the incarnation, I know, so I may call you Mr. Ambassador and sometimes Senator Sasser. That has a nice alliterative quality to it.
Fine.
And next is David Michael Lampton, Mike to his friends. He is the George and Sadie Hyman Professor of China Studies at the School of Advanced International Studies at Johns Hopkins University here in Washington, D.C. You have to get a shorter title. He's also Director of the China Studies Program at SAIS. And the author of numerous books and articles about China. So thank you very much. Welcome. Thanks for being on the China Forum with us. I wanted to start off, Ambassador Sasser, with you. This was President Obama's first state visit to China, his first important trip. How important is, first of all, a president's first visit to China? Is it looked at as some kind of a symbolic gesture, telegraphing what the policy is going to be like? And second, what about this particular visit?
Well, I think this visit, number one, this was not his first encounter with the President Hu Jintao of China. So I don't know that I would elevate this to some call it a summit meeting. I don't think I would elevate it to that status. I think the president was going to China as he did to going to APEC in Singapore and to Japan and to South Korea to indicate that the United States still thought of itself as a participant in the Pacific and a major Pacific power. I'm not sure that this is something that's welcome news perhaps in China, but the president went ahead to say that he was a Pacific president, if you'll recall. But this was, I think, an important visit, but not overly important. I think that Hu Jintao and President Obama are going to have many, many contacts over the next 3.5 years. I thought it was interesting, however, that the Chinese were very careful not to let President Obama have too much contact with the Chinese people. I well recall when President Clinton came to China, and then later President George Bush, they were given a much more open forum to address the Chinese people than President Obama was.
Why do you think that is, that they didn't give him the same kind of a broad forum?
Well, I think there may be 2 or 3 reasons. One, I think Hu Jintao is a much more buttoned down, much more cautious political leader than President Jiang Zemin was. Compared to Hu Jintao, Jiang Zemin was a free spirit, and I think he enjoyed somewhat the push and pull of meeting with world leaders on a public forum. And also, I think perhaps the Chinese were a little apprehensive about Obama. Here is a man who is probably more revered abroad than he is at home, with very large positive ratings internationally. And the Chinese, I think, did not want to give him the same stage to address the Chinese people that he's used to address the people in Western Europe, etc. After all, this is the first president of color ever in the United States, and this cannot be lost on the sort of multi-ethnic international community.
So a very cautious approach. U.S. officials, I'm going to go to you now, Mike. U.S. officials, in talking about the visit, and thank you for pointing that out. I have used the word visit rather than summit for that same reason. But U.S. officials, in describing this visit, have said, some U.S. officials said that they were disappointed in the that the media coverage of the visit was not more uniformly positive. I think current U.S. Ambassador John Huntsman in particular said he thought the media coverage was off the mark, that it was overly critical. Do you agree with that assessment, that there was this skewed media coverage? Well, I guess first I should ask, is this anything new in the coverage of China? But do you agree that the media coverage didn't really represent the visit the way it really went?
Yes, I do. I think the media identified goals the trip never had and then found deficiencies when they weren't met. And I think that was the basic process. I think, though, put this in a little context, if you look back to previous administrations, whether it was when Ronald Reagan came in, he wanted to sort of renegotiate the arrangements on Taiwan with the PRC, and they didn't welcome that. It led to a year and a half, 2 years of fighting with the PRC and not a smooth transition on China policy. Bill Clinton came in, and his campaign rhetoric during his first campaign for president led to the expectation we're going to be big changes in human rights, and we had a year and a half of very difficult times there. This administration has come in and it's been very smooth, and I think in a sense it was the very smoothness of the transition that led many people to expect this would be translated into solving all the difficult issues in our relationship. And I think if you just look at the issues that are front and center about which the press criticized the president for not making sufficient progress. One is rebalancing the entire Chinese economy. 20% of the world's people, they have high unemployment. They're very worried about internal stability. They're not going to change their currency policy, their trade policy, or their economic policy overnight. Whether a president's visiting or not, and I think it's unrealistic to think they would. Climate change, some observers were criticizing the administration because we didn't get a climate agreement. Well, we haven't even got a climate agreement with Congress, between the Congress and the executive branch. You can hardly fault the Chinese for not agreeing to a policy we haven't yet managed to devise ourselves. And conversely, you certainly can't criticize the president for not convincing them of a policy we don't have. So I think in a sense the very success of the transition set them up for an unrealistic set of expectations.
Have we moved into a time now when our expectations of U.S.-China relations really have come away from the crisis-driven set of circumstances that we found ourselves in the past, and that we're now dealing more business as usual, like we would any other major bilateral relationship?
Well, I'll take a stab at it, and I think there's an irony here, and that is that in effect, I think we have the most stable, fundamentally stable relationship with China we've had certainly since 1972. Mm-hmm. If you think about Nixon, when he went, it was essentially based on the Soviet Union and a common fear of the Soviet Union. Under President Clinton, particularly in his second administration, is essentially based on economic interests. Now, I think the United States and China have a shared interest in stabilization. Stabilization of the global ecology, the global economy, counterproliferation security. So we have a very broad range, I think, of issues that are grounding this relationship. But it's, in a sense, the very stability of the relationship and the enormity of the things on which it's based means it's going to be very slow in making progress on these issues. So you face the irony of the administration and many analysts, myself included, saying, we now have the best U.S.-China relationship we ever had. I believe that in terms of its fundamental foundation. But on the other hand, this isn't translating into the solution of all of these problems in a rapid way. And therefore, I think we have to keep two things opposed. One is the relationship is now focused on a common agenda of stabilization. And at the same time that we share this analysis, we, as two countries, have very separate priorities among those issues, different approaches to dealing with those issues, and it's going to be just a constant pulling and hauling, compromising, slugging it out with the Chinese, all the while both sides proclaiming that they have a sound relationship, which I believe is generally true.
I agree.